I'm gonna obviously connect to the last presentation we had here, but I'm gonna connect more chiefly to the presentation we had in the morning, which was also about political clientelism, but viewed in this broader regional sense. And these two presentations kind of show what we were doing during the project, or what we tried to do. One of the goals we had was obviously to define and conceptualize political clientelism. And we actually found that we can even speak of a certain Western Balkan variety, or at least we think so. And you're going to see in a moment why. The second thing that we wanted to do is to relate to that bottom-up orientation of Inform. And this is this issue, the issue of who are the clients in the societies of the Western Balkans. I believe, like my personal opinion is that we've made some inroads in better understanding political mobilization in the region in general. We usually see scholars and area specialists talking about political mobilization in a sense whether parties are promoting liberal or illiberal platforms, and clientelism is kind of in the back. But the data that we have obviously shows that clientelism is an important means of political mobilization, which is probably kind of overlooked by scholars. So we hope we made some advancements here. So I'm gonna start from some theoretical points, some stuff that are already in the literature. When people ask themselves who are the typical clients, the usual first answer is that the clients are the poor. So you're going to find this everywhere. It's a sort of truism in social science, not just in political science, but beyond, also in sociology and anthropology. Or at least that low-income people would tend to enter clientelism easier than the rest. Second point, which is really, really popular and both theoretically and empirically shown many times, is that residents of smaller communities are usual participants in clientelism in comparison to the rest, and this is defended by scholars pursuing this. It's defended by the reason that it's easier for patrons to monitor the voting choices of people when they reside in smaller communities because everyone knows each other, etc. This is a more novel argument that I personally like really much, and it kind of relates to that citizen side of clientelism, is that citizens who approach political parties in their own volition with requests for clientelist benefits, those are the typical people that engage in clientelism. And finally, this is also an older argument and found later in some new forms, is that parties like to target core voters and not swing voters with clientelism. And this has been disputed, but this is kind of the more popular thing. So in this presentation, which is going to be quantitative, so I'm putting a warning now, we're going to see whether this stuff holds for the Western Balkans. Prior to that, it's important to point out that all these authors that I refer to here have studied South America. And at least in political science, the study of clientelism has been most advanced there. So all of this is about South America. All of this is about vote buying also. So these scholars previously had understood clientelism exclusively as vote buying. In the course of this project, we found that this is very narrow. And we understand vote buying as the simple trade of some small benefit for votes. Yeah, of course. So they kind of equate clientelism with what parties do when they are pursuing election campaigning. We're going to go further than that. We know much less about the implication of other practices that Misha presented in the morning. And we really know little about the perspectives of citizens in clientelism. So scholars are focused on political parties, and that's all. They are like the main drivers, and this is the main idea, which we're going to practically dispute a bit later. So in the morning, we've seen this, but I just want to return to it. So we made a distinction between two dimensions of clientelism. The one is electoral versus relational. The characteristic of the electoral is that it always takes place inside election campaigns. And these are these small handouts that voters get only to vote one time. When we're talking about relational clientelism, we're talking about a long-term kind of relationship. So one client can get a list of benefits over a longer time, and it's going to support a given political party over a longer time. And then we make a difference between clientelism based on positive inducements. This is when the client gets something, like a material benefit. And the second option is negative inducements, is when the client is actually threatened by cutting access to benefits. So if someone is employed in the public sector and suddenly gets a threat, you must vote for my party in the next election or you get fired, this would be the negative inducements type of clientelism. So that's kind of the conceptual part. And we're moving to a sort of empirical quantitative investigation. But our research is also informed by qualitative data, so even if you don't have it here, take in mind that we're thinking about that also, especially in the conceptual part when we try to list these clientelist practices in dimensions. So I'm going to show you logistic regressions, 3 models, on survey data from Inform. I'm going to show you average regional level effects, country fixed. You know something about the survey from the previous presentations. So we're going to look how does engagement differ in 3 different categories of practices. We have the positive inducement targeting, then the negative one, and finally a form of relational clientelism which we call clientelist benefit seeking, and this is the act when the client goes to the party and asks, I need this in exchange for my political support. All the models will be the same. The predictors are income, education, employment status, place of residence, party socialization, minority status, age, and gender, the really typical ones that are used also in those studies in South America that I showed you before. So we saw before this graph, so I'm not going to hold too much on it. I'm just going to say that the negative inducements variable is being built by these two: been requested to vote in a certain way by a manager boss, or been requested to participate in party activities by manager boss. If our respondent said yes, we assume that it has been targeted in a negative kind of way by its superior. So there are some differences between countries, but it's kind of interesting to also see how it looks on a really regional and that kind of average level. These are the models. It's a rather big output. That's why everything is empty now. I'm going to show that part later. But we have about 4,050 respondents in the models. We do country fixed effects and we do some bootstrap replications, and we're going to show the effects in odds ratios. So we're going to be able to see how different categories differ in each of the 3 models. So first we're taking a look at income and education. So a really nice surprise that we have here is that it seems that not the poorest segment of the population, but groups that fare rather well in terms of income are more frequent participants in political clientelism than the poor ones. This is especially visible in this benefit-seeking model, where we even have this kind of big, for example, I was supposed to rather say that first we divide the income variable in 5 quintiles according to regional distribution. And we have these guys in the second quintile have 5 times the odds than the poorest quintile to participate in benefit seeking. And it's also kind of rather big for the third quintile, where we have 6 times the odds. And this is kind of surprising from the point of view of clientelism studies. What I would argue is that because we're looking at a bigger group of clientelist practices, we're not looking only at vote buying. Vote buying could be exclusively associated to the poorest segment. And we have the same thing with the positive inducements, where 5th quintile people basically have twice the odds to participate in clientelism than the first quintile. In education, there's not too much interesting things beside that people that have secondary education have almost 2 times the odds than the primary ones to be targeted by negative inducements, clientelism. When it comes to employment in public sector, the most interesting thing that we can notice in model 2, where people who work in the public sector have much higher odds than the inactive and the unemployed to participate in, to be targeted by negative inducement clientelism. So this is kind of expected. People that work in the public sector are actually those who are pressured in this way. Not a systematic effect in terms of the rural-urban divide, which is also contrary kind of what has been previously done in the literature. When we come to the party socialization variable, this is basically a variable where we ask people, have you ever been member of political parties, or are you a member now? And all of people who said yes, we say that those are people that are socialized via political parties. And this is like the most stable predictor of clientelism. In all of the 3 models, we have like a positive relationship, most important here in the benefit-seeking model. So that means people who know people in political parties are more likely to ask for, yeah, this is kind of expected, definitely, but it's nice to see it anyway. Minority people have higher odds. People belonging to minorities have higher odds on regional level to be targeted by positive inducements clientelism than the majority groups. And some interesting effects also on age and gender. I'm just gonna summarize this, and I'm done. I'm really fast. So in this in this analysis, the poor are not the typical clients. And I honestly think that this is because we're looking at broader group of clientelist practices, not just that vote buying or turnout buying thing, which other authors pick up in the literature as everything about clientelism. Second, education is not a stable predictor. Employment status also, with the notable exception that public sector employees are typical targets of negative inducements clientelism. Unexpected thing, expected. There is no systematic relationship between place of residence clientelist engagement in any of the models, so this is not really important. There is the same likelihood that people in urban and in rural places will do it. It doesn't matter. Socialization in political parties is our most effective predictor, and we've seen this. Citizens with minority status in positive inducement clientelism. Age is negatively correlated in positive inducements targeting. You can explain this by, I don't know, people that want to succeed in life can knock on the door on political parties and or be more engaged. I really don't know. And males are more frequently engaged than females, and this is a finding that's visible in some studies. It happens actually, especially in societies where males are more have higher odds to how to say, to have a better life than females, even in formal institutions, etc. So clientelism does not differ so much in more patriarchal societies, and etc. Why is all of this important? First, we have different types of people engaged in different types of clientelist practices. So looking at clientelism as vote buying is completely insufficient, and especially in the Balkans, where we find vote buying to some extent, but everyone is going to tell you everywhere that, let's say, employment in public sector is the most important benefit that a client can get. That's like the most important thing. If we want to combat clientelism, like to develop a successful policy intervention, we must understand that there is variations. So, for example, OSCE, ODHR in the last elections in Albania and Montenegro have put combating vote buying as priority recommendation. That's the most priority recommendation. But this combating vote buying is not gonna work if your clients are relational clients. You're not gonna do much with it. So this is why it's important. And I hope that with these differences between models, we've shown that it's also important for scientific inference. So when you look at clientelism, it's not just a practice, but it's a group of different things. Another important thing that we should underline is that clientelism is not exclusively a mobilization strategy of political parties. Citizens can also pursue their interests through clientelism, and this is often neglected, at least in political science literature. In anthropology, it's a bit different, where people are more sensible about what citizens do. So in political science case, we're always talking about parties targeting citizens, but also citizens can do something for themselves via clientelism. It's typically this particularistic, not universalistic interests. And finally, we had a significant and stable effect of party socialization, which means that you must know people to be a client. If you want to get something through clientelist means, you must know people in the party, and so on. It's not going to help you, at least this is what we have through the semi-structured interviews. The membership card of a political party is nothing if you do not have a person to knock on him and tell him, help me out with this, help me out with that, and so on. And that benefit-seeking variable was really high in terms of frequency, so that's another thing. So this is all for me. Thank you very much.